One of the reasons I'm so excited about MCP is the ability it gives us to learn and explore new developer tools. Let's see how this works in Hypermode. I'm going to create a new graph instance. Let's explore e-commerce graph data. And this will provision a new Hypermode graph instance. You'll notice here connection strings for MCP, but also the Dgraph endpoint and GraphQL. I'm going to copy the MCP configuration and add this to Claude Desktop. To do this, we'll go to the developer settings and paste in the JSON configuration that we copied from Hypermode. And then we'll just reload Claude to register our Hypermode MCP server. You can see the tools added here. And let's load some sample data into Dgraph, generating customer, product, and order data to fulfill our e-commerce data. And we'll see here that Claude is selecting what tools from our Hypermode Dgraph MCP server. We'll need to allow those tools. Initially, Claude is inspecting the schema, seeing that essentially the database is blank, creating a new schema that matches our e-commerce data that we want Claude to generate, then generating mutations to add this data to the graph. Now, an important concept to understand with database MCP servers like the Dgraph MCP server is that it's the model that is often generating the database query. The tools provided typically are enabling the model to execute those queries, fetch the schema, or understand more about the database. So we can see here that Claude is going through a few iterations to create customer data, product data, and fictitious order data. And Claude is smart enough to be able to double check itself. So after updating the graph data, Claude then runs queries to check and make sure that the data actually exists in the graph. And where it doesn't get the expected result, Claude is able to iterate on this, generating new DQL queries to ensure that our data is loaded as expected. And we can see here in the result of each one of these tool calls, the data that comes back from the database as well. So we've created some sample data. Let's now create a graph visualization to help us understand the schema of the graph, but also the graph data itself. And in this case, Claude is going to first generate a database query to fetch the data from the database, and then use the artifacts feature in Claude to actually generate some JavaScript and HTML to show us an interactive graph visualization. So here we can see the data loaded from Dgraph into a graph representation. We can see the customers, the products, the orders. We can explore the schema. And this particular example has some abilities to zoom in on customers and orders or just product information. And in addition to the typical force-directed layout, there are a few other layout options. Hierarchical, which can be sometimes useful for various ways of interpreting graphs, radial, but let's stick with the force-directed layout here. Now, a common use case for graphs is generating personalized recommendations. So let's see how we can generate personalized recommendations using DQL and this data set. So we'll ask Claude to help us write some DQL queries to generate personalized recommendations for, in this case, a specific user. And we can see here that Claude is going to come up with a few different approaches to this, using kind of the typical, this user purchased this item, what are other items that similar users are purchasing, this collaborative filtering approach, but there may be other approaches that we want to try as well. So Claude is going to give us lots of different options. And we can see here now that Claude is generating, again, using the artifacts feature, lots of different approaches based on similar users, content-based, more advanced graph traversals, demographic-based queries, really giving us a lot of options for understanding how we can use graph traversal to generate product recommendations. And again, we see here that Claude is going to iterate a little bit. So it's trying to come up with one final query that takes these different approaches into account, sees that it gets a little bit of an error and it iterates on that until it gets the result that it expects. And our final result here is going to be, again, using the Claude artifacts feature, generating some HTML to give us this sort of report showing here are the results for this user, explaining how DQL is used, and again, allowing us to drill down to see the results for different approaches and the database query used. So this was all powered by the Dgraph MCP server on Hypermode. Check out the docs if you want to learn more and give it a try. Cheers.